I'm Amanda, 34 single mom, and for the past year, I've been piecing together a life that not too long ago felt like it had been yanked out from under me like a rug I didn't know was fraying. The day I'm about to tell you about started as many memorable ones do, in the most ordinary way: balloons, cupcakes, and a backyard filled with the sound of children's laughter. But it ended with a moment that carved itself into me, the kind of moment that straightens your spine and teaches you that sometimes the power of your silence will echo louder than someone else's scream. My son Caleb had been counting down the days to his 10th birthday like it was the event of the decade. He's always been that way, soft-spoken, thoughtful, a boy who finds joy in the small things, like licking frosting off the spoon while we bake together. He and I had planned every detail of his party side by side. It wasn't going to be anything extravagant, just our style. A gathering of close family, a handful of his buddies from school, some simple decorations, and of course the chocolate cake he insisted we smother in blue frosting and cover with marshmallows. It was supposed to be a day filled with comfort, safety, and the kind of love you can feel in your bones. But 2 days before the party, Brian, my ex-husband, called. And just like Brian always does, he dropped his news like he was offering me a favor I should be grateful for. Courtney wants to meet Caleb's family. I think it's time, he announced, like it was some casual formality. No discussion. No, would you be okay with that, Amanda? Just a statement, as if his decision was the only one that mattered. I bit back every ounce of protest that swelled inside me and nodded into the silence, even though every part of me wanted to scream, "No, not today." Brian had walked out on me after 12 years of marriage, after 12 years of what I thought was a stable, if not perfect, family. One day we were mapping out our summer road trip, and the next he was packing boxes and signing the lease on a downtown loft. And not even 6 months later, there were photos splashed all over social media of him with Courtney, her hand resting like a brand on his chest engagement ring, glinting under city lights like a siren. So sure, I knew this day was inevitable. I just didn't think it would crash into Caleb's birthday like an uninvited storm. When they finally arrived, the whole energy in the house shifted like a cold draft through a warm room. Caleb darted to the door, beaming his arms wrapping tightly around his dad's waist. Courtney, of course, followed a calculated few steps behind the rhythmic click of her stilettos on our old hardwood floors, echoing like she was walking into a job interview she was certain she would ace. She wore a blinding white dress, tight, flawless, daring anyone to find a wrinkle. Her makeup looked like it had been airbrushed by a professional, and the gift bag she handed Caleb, complete with the name of an upscale downtown toy store plastered across the front, screamed, "Look how much we spent." "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she purred, her smile thin, stretched. "Hope you love it." Brian picked it out, but I gave it my stamp of approval. I mustered a polite smile that felt glued on. "Thank you for coming," I replied, my tone even masking the hollow ache under my ribs. Courtney's gaze swept across my modest living room like she was mentally appraising the furniture. "It's cute," she said, pausing just long enough to let the words sting. "Very homey." I ignored the jab. Caleb was already pulling her toward the cake table, oblivious to the tension swirling between the adults. An hour or so later, once the kids had filled up on cupcakes and turned the backyard into a foam sword battleground, I was in the kitchen, quietly cleaning up spilled soda and cupcake crumbs. That's when it happened. The moment that would lodge itself in my memory like a splinter. Courtney, ever the showwoman, turned to Brian with a smile that barely hid the venom laced beneath it. She picked up the broom I'd leaned against the wall and offered it to him loud enough for the parents nearby to hear every word. "Here," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "Help your mother clean up. This is your place now, right?" Brian froze mid-bite of his cupcake. Conversations nearby hiccuped, and I felt every eye swing toward me like spotlights. I looked at Caleb. He had heard it. Of course he had. His stepmother had just called me his mother, not in the way that acknowledged my role, but in the way that dismissed it, as if I were the hired help hosting a party I didn't belong to. His cheeks turned the color of the frosting on his cake. He looked at me, his eyes searching for some cue, some reaction. Would I cry? Would I yell? Would I throw the broom at her feet? I did none of those things. Instead, I smiled, tight, unwavering, and silent. I took the broom gently from her manicured hand and whispered, "Thank you, I've got it." Her brows flickered in surprise, as if she'd expected me to fall apart. But I didn't. I turned back to wiping the table, my hands shaking beneath the cloth, but my face calm. What she didn't know was that I had something better than a snappy comeback. I had something planned that would speak louder than anything she could say or do. I had one last gift for Caleb and Courtney. She had no idea it was coming. Siam Sakyam. Brian had always been the one who craved attention, the grand gestures, the elaborate parties, the carefully curated photos posted online for likes and admiration. That was his currency. But me, I've always believed the most meaningful celebrations weren't about how much you spent, but how much heart you put into them. So for Caleb's 10th birthday, I did what I had always done. I made it ours. Simple, personal, real. 2 days before the party, I was already in the kitchen baking the cupcakes. Caleb loves most, the rich chocolate kind with thick, imperfect swirls of blue frosting that stained our fingers and made us laugh. My mom, Linda, came over to help string the paper lanterns we'd picked out from the discount store the same way she had done for every family birthday since I was a kid. She even dragged up the old folding table from her basement, the one with the wobble in the middle that's been patched and braced so many times it had become part of our tradition. I covered it with a superhero tablecloth Caleb had picked himself. To him, it looked perfect, heroic even. Caleb had chosen every decoration with his careful eye blue and silver streamers, foam swords for the backyard adventure, and the centerpiece, a giant helium balloon shaped like a dragon floating like a sentry over the party. We didn't have a big budget, but Caleb didn't care about that. His excitement was boundless. This was his day, and he'd invited the people who mattered most, his closest school friends, the neighbor's twins, his grandma, and of course my brother Jason, who promised to stop by after his long shift at the fire station. That morning the house buzzed with the kind of happiness only children seem to channel so purely. Caleb was up before dawn, bouncing onto my bed with a small, carefully wrapped box in his hands. "You can't open it until tonight." He grinned, his face glowing with the kind of joy that made my chest ache. "You're the one turning 10, buddy. I should be the one giving you surprises," I teased, pulling him into a hug. "I already have mine," he whispered into my ear, eyes shining. That's just the kind of boy Caleb is, gentle, thoughtful, carrying more emotional weight than any child his age should have to. Since Brian left, he'd become my anchor, grounding me in ways I never expected. He saw things most people missed. He noticed when my smiles didn't quite reach my eyes, when my laughter had an edge to it. He tried to be strong for me, though. I silently wished he never had to. The divorce had left cracks in him that I hadn't wanted to admit. One day, his dad had been there, sprawled on the floor with him, building Lego cities, reading bedtime stories. The next, Brian was gone off to a shiny downtown apartment, his life rewritten in Instagram-perfect snapshots, featuring Courtney. They'd both acted like Caleb and I were an afterthought, a relic from some past life they were eager to forget. I had tried to hold everything together for Caleb. My days became a carousel of routines, school drop-offs, soccer games, laundry bills, breathing. I told myself I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. But when Brian called, and without even the decency of asking, told me he was bringing Courtney to Caleb's party, it felt like being blindsided by a punch I never saw coming. "She just wants to be part of Caleb's life," Brian had said, his voice dripping with self-satisfaction, like he deserved a gold star for including her. I hadn't argued. I just forced out a hollow fine and hung up before my voice cracked under the weight of the conversation. That morning, as I blew up balloons and smoothed the creases from the faded tablecloth, my mom hovered nearby, handing me a tray of cupcakes with a look that only mothers can give, the kind that says they see through you even when you smile. "You sure you're okay?" she asked softly. "I'm fine," I replied, arranging the cupcakes into a slightly lopsided tower. "It's not about me today." Linda didn't press. She just gave me that knowing glance and handed me another tray. "If she says something nasty, I'll break a plate and pretend it was an accident," I joked weakly. "No broken dishes today," I promised, knowing full well I was lying to both of us. When Brian finally showed up, Courtney clinging to his side like a designer handbag, I was outside lighting the birthday candles. I glanced up and saw them walking up the path together, his casual button-down undone at the collar, as if this was nothing more than a leisurely brunch. She, in contrast, wore white, a deliberate choice. I was sure every detail of her ensemble calculated to say, "I am the woman now." Caleb ran to the door, his face lighting up. "Dad!" he shouted, throwing his arms around Brian. Then, with a forced politeness, he turned to Courtney and offered a stiff wave. "Hi." She crouched, pressing an airbrushed kiss to his cheek. "You've gotten so big. Wow, double digits already. I brought you something I think you're going to love." I stood by the cake, the lighter still flickering between my fingers, swallowing back the bitterness that threatened to rise. "Hey," Brian said awkwardly. "Thanks for letting us come." I nodded tightly. "Of course, it's Caleb's day." But as I turned back to the cake, I felt the cold prickle of Courtney's gaze sweeping through my house like an audit. That faint, polished smile lingered on her lips, as if she already knew she didn't belong here, and yet she planned to make sure I felt like I didn't either. I drew a breath, lit the final candle, and called out, "Everyone inside, time to sing." Caleb stood at the center of the room, beaming, oblivious to the shift in the air, oblivious to the way the ground beneath us had already started to tremble. They say a mother knows. And I did. The moment she stepped through my door, I felt it, the storm behind her carefully posed grin. Courtney floated through my modest living room like it was a garage sale she stumbled into by mistake, her body language screaming, "This is beneath me," even if she didn't say it aloud. She placed her extravagant ribbon-wrapped gift bag next to Caleb's modest pile of presents, and with a voice meant to carry said, "It's from both of us." Brian picked it out, but I upgraded it. She smiled like she expected applause. I stayed polite. I wasn't going to cause a scene in front of my son. The room was full of kids, my mom was busy refilling drinks, and I was determined to keep the peace for Caleb. Brian, as always, faded into the background, hovering near the snack table, mumbling about football to Jason, pretending not to notice the way Courtney's barbs landed like glass slivers in the air between us. Maybe Brian knew Courtney was overstepping. Maybe he simply didn't care. Or maybe, most likely, he was too wrapped in his own comfort to notice the way she made the air in my living room feel tighter, heavier, like she was laying claim to something that never belonged to her. The problem wasn't that Courtney was there, I'd braced for that. It was the way she carried herself, like she was hosting, not attending. Like our little house, our memories, our life was just her stage. She perched beside Brian, with the ease of someone accustomed to centerpieces and catered brunches, looping her arm through his, tossing her head back with a laugh that sounded rehearsed, each comment she made landing like paper cuts, small enough to pass as jokes, but sharp enough to sting. She didn't have to say it outright. Her body language screamed it. "This isn't good enough for me, and by extension, neither are you." At one point, as she floated past my mother, she offered her an oversweet smile. "Oh, Linda, this punch is lovely. I can see where Amanda gets her hosting skills." My mom returned her grin with a tight, practiced smile, the kind that doesn't touch the eyes, and leaned into me, whispering in Spanish, "Esa mujer no tiene vergüenza." That woman has no shame. I tried to laugh it off. For Caleb. I wanted his day to stay intact, for the joy in his eyes to remain untouched. That was the only thing that mattered. But then came the moment, the one that made the room, still made my stomach twist so tightly I could barely breathe. The kids had gone outside, their laughter trailing through the open windows as they sword-fought in the backyard. I stayed behind, tidying up the debris of frosting-streaked plates, crumpled napkins, juice spills creeping under the wobbling table. I reached for the broom, I'd leaned against the wall, but before my hand could touch it, Courtney, ever eager for an audience, swept in like a shark scenting blood. "Here," she said, her voice dripping with false cheer as she thrust the broom toward Brian. "Help your mother clean up. This is your place now, right?" Her laugh sliced through the room, brittle, hollow, the kind that demanded everyone laugh along or else. Brian froze, half-eaten cupcake in hand, caught off guard like the rest of us. Conversations halted mid-sentence. My cheeks burned not with embarrassment, but with the weight of holding myself still. I turned toward Caleb, standing by the kitchen doorway, clutching a half-devoured cookie, his face draining of color. He'd heard it, every word, and he looked embarrassed. Not for Courtney, not even for Brian, but for me. For what had just been done to his mom in the middle of a house full of people. He didn't look at her. He looked at me, searching, pleading, wondering if I'd break, if I'd yell, if I'd cry right there in front of everyone. I did none of those things. Instead, I gave her the kind of smile that said more than any words could, a tight, measured smile of someone who refused to play. I took the broom from her perfectly manicured hand, and with all the calm I could muster, murmured, "Thank you. I've got it." For a flicker of a second, she blinked, thrown off. Maybe she expected a scene, a meltdown she could later spin into her own narrative, but she got neither. I turned away, began sweeping hands, trembling breath tight in my throat. Linda appeared at my side, silent and fierce, and gently pried the broom from my grip. "Go sit," she whispered beneath the hum of the guests. "You've done enough." I sat, but my heart continued its furious pounding inside my chest. It wasn't Courtney's words that cut me deepest. It was the look in Caleb's eyes afterward, the way he glanced at me for the rest of the afternoon, quieter, smaller, like something inside him had dimmed. That spark of birthday joy snuffed by a humiliation he couldn't name but could feel. That's when I remembered the gift, the one I had set aside for later. A simple wooden box he and I had painted together weeks before, a navy blue box decorated with gold letters filled with the kind of treasures only we understood. Photos, scribbled drawings, his first baby sock, and a letter he'd written himself when I wasn't looking. I had planned to give it to him after the last guest left in the quiet glow of the evening. But now it had to be today. Now it had to be seen. Courtney had turned his party into her showcase, bringing her trendy toys and her barbed comments, trying to impress, trying to dominate. But what she didn't understand, what she couldn't buy or fake or snatch, was the bond I had with my son. The kind of bond that can't be dressed up, but still outshines any designer wrapping paper. After the incident with the broom, I couldn't stop glancing at Caleb, who hovered at the edges of his own party, laughing when his friends laughed but never fully joining in. He kept checking on me like he needed to be sure I was still standing. Like he needed to apologize for something that wasn't even his fault. That more than anything broke me in ways Sierra's words never could. The damage she'd done wasn't to me, it was to him. The kind of wound you don't see on the skin, but one that lingers in the way a child shrinks from joy. I stood in the kitchen, refilling lemonade, gripping the plastic jug like it might anchor me. This was supposed to be his day, I thought bitterly, the guilt wrapping itself around me like a second skin. For a heartbeat, I questioned myself. Should I have said something? Should I have unleashed everything I held in, called her out, defended my place in my own home? But the answer came like a whisper from my bones. No, that's not who I am. That's not the lesson I want to etch into Caleb's memory. I want him to know that strength doesn't come from yelling the loudest or knocking someone down to feel taller. It comes from knowing your worth and standing firm in it, even when the world tries to paint you small. And with that clarity, I knew exactly what to do. I walked into my bedroom, opened the old pine dresser, and pulled out the box, the one Caleb and I had painted on that rainy Saturday, using stencils and shaky hands to spell his name in gold across the lid. Inside, nestled like treasures only he and I could understand, were the pieces of our story. A family photo from before Brian left. A tiny green dinosaur that used to live in Caleb's coat pocket. A pressed flower he'd picked for me last Mother's Day, and at the bottom, a folded letter I hadn't yet read his words, meant for a day like today. I held the box against my chest, and in that moment, it felt heavier than it should, heavy with meaning. Heavy with love, heavy with the knowledge that this was the moment Sierra couldn't buy her way into the moment Brian couldn't dress up with a price tag. This was ours. When I stepped back into the room, the air felt unchanged, the kids giggling over cake, the parents chatting in small circles. Sierra perched on the armchair, sipping her sparkling water like she was enduring a dull work event. Caleb spotted me standing at the edge of the room, the memory box cradled close to my chest, and his face lit up with that rare, unguarded smile he only offered when he knew something special. Something just for us was about to unfold. "Come here, sweetheart," I called softly, my voice threading through the hum of conversation. "I have one last gift for you." He patted over curiosity dancing in his eyes, and although the laughter and chatter of the other guests still filled the house, there was a perceptible hush that followed us, as if the shift in my tone had pulled everyone's attention toward this quiet, private moment unfolding in plain sight. I lowered the box into his small hands, brushing his knuckles with mine as I murmured, "Open it when you're ready." Without rushing, without the frenzy he'd shown for the glossy-wrapped video games and blinking electronics earlier, Caleb settled cross-legged onto the floor in front of the couch. He handled the box as if it held something sacred, peeling back the tissue and lifting the lid with reverence, as though he already knew it carried more weight than anything he'd unwrapped that day. People began to gather, their voices tapering off, drawn by something they couldn't name but couldn't look away from either. From across the room, Courtney watched her crossed legs frozen in place, her painted smile plastered on tight. She still wore the mask of indifference, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her coiling tighter with every passing second. Brian stood awkwardly nearby, puzzled as if he couldn't remember the last time Caleb was given a gift that hadn't been picked off a store shelf. Caleb's face lit up as he unearthed the little green dinosaur. "I thought I lost this," he whispered, holding it up to the light. He turned the old photo around in his hand, the one of the three of us frozen in a happier, simpler time before everything unraveled. Then his eyes met mine, wide and earnest. "Can I read the letter?" he asked. I nodded, my voice caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. "If you want to, baby." He unfolded the paper with deliberate care, smoothing the creases against his lap. There was no fidgeting, no hesitation. Caleb wasn't nervous. He was grounded, steady, as if this was his stage, his truth, and the moment belonged to him alone. "I wrote this a while ago," he announced. "I didn't show it to anyone. I was saving it for today." I swallowed hard, not knowing what he was about to share, but knowing already it would tear through me. "Go ahead, honey," I whispered. He glanced at the letter and began to read aloud, his voice soft, but sure, each word landing like a stone in a still pond, sending ripples through the room that no one dared interrupt. "Dear Mom," he began, "thank you for always loving me. Even when I mess up, even when I cry about small things, you make me feel safe every day." Each line stripped the room bare. The conversations ceased entirely, even the air seemed to still. My mom dabbed quietly at her eyes. Jason stood motionless, arms folded, his jaw set tight. Some of the other parents looked away, giving us the dignity of privacy, but I could feel their presence, witnesses to something raw, something honest. Caleb's voice didn't tremble. "You pack my lunch even when you're tired. You come to every soccer game even when it rains. I know sometimes you're sad, I see it. But you still smile at me. You still sing when we clean the kitchen. You still dance when your favorite song comes on. You make life feel okay. I don't want a new family. I don't want a new house. I just want you. You're my best friend, my favorite person, my real home." He paused, looked up at me, then finished, "Happy birthday" to me. I already got the best gift. Love, Caleb. The letter settled over the room like a blanket, heavy and warm, suffocating in the best and worst ways. My throat ached, but no words came. Instead, I opened my arms, and Caleb, never one to hold back when it mattered, stepped right into them, burying his face into my chest. I meant every word he whispered. I know, I murmured back, holding him tighter than I had all day. So did I. A chair scraped loudly against the floor, breaking the silence like shattered glass. Courtney stood abruptly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her face had gone pale beneath the layers of foundation. The smug confidence she'd worn like armor had fractured, splintered by something she couldn't compete with. She looked around the room, desperate for something to anchor herself to, but there was nothing left. She had been stripped bare, seen for exactly who she was, and more importantly, so had I. I caught her eyes, but I didn't glare, didn't smirk, didn't gloat. I didn't need to. She looked away first. Finally, Brian broke the silence with a hollow brittle, "That was really sweet, buddy." It sounded as empty as he looked, his voice shrinking into the space around him, realizing perhaps for the first time what he had walked away from. Caleb turned toward him, polite, poised beyond his years. "Thanks, Dad," he said simply before settling back down with the memory box nestled in his lap, running his fingers gently over each artifact, treating them like the treasures they were. Courtney cleared her throat, a sharp crack in the air. "We should get going," she said, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. Brian nodded, rubbing the back of his neck like he couldn't figure out how to stand comfortably in his own skin anymore. "Yeah, thanks for having us." I smiled, calm, unmoved. "Of course." They made their exit in silence. Courtney barely glanced back, but as she passed the hallway mirror, I caught a glimpse of her reflection, eyes downcast, lips pressed into a tight line. She hadn't been defeated exactly, but she'd been unmasked. She knew it. I knew it. And judging by the way the room finally exhaled when the door clicked shut, so did everyone else. Conversations slowly resumed, plates clinked softly, and music trickled back through the speakers. But the air had shifted. The tightness was gone, replaced by something gentler, freer. Caleb sat beside me, the box still in his lap, his small hands tracing its edges. "I'm glad I read it," he said. "So am I whispered. He tilted his head toward me. "Did I embarrass you?" I pulled him closer. "No, baby, you honored me." Later, after the last guest trickled out and the sky blushed into dusk, I found something tucked deep in the folds of tissue paper inside the box. A second note folded in quarters, Caleb's handwriting scrawled across the front. Small, simple, folded into quarters. The handwriting unmistakably Caleb's, the edges smudged from the touch of his hands. I unfolded it slowly, bracing myself for whatever truth my son had quietly hidden away. P.S. It read his words, written in the careful print of a boy learning to say hard things softly. I saw what she said to you today. I didn't like it. I didn't know what to say, but I'll never let anyone talk to you like that again. You're my mom. That means everything. I pressed the paper to my chest, closed my eyes, and let the silence of the house wrap around me like a blanket. Sierra had strutted into my home head, held high, armed with her polished smile, and that broom thinking she could sweep me into a corner, humiliate me in front of my son, in front of the people who mattered. But she'd made a miscalculation. What she didn't understand, and what Caleb had seen with perfect, unwavering clarity, was that love, the kind that threads through the cracks of ordinary life, isn't something you can buy in a boutique or display in a social media post. It's in the quiet, in the ordinary, in the loyalty that doesn't need applause. She brought a broom thinking it would reduce me to dust, but my son brought something far stronger. He brought truth, and it swept everything else away. After the last guest left, and the echoes of forced laughter faded, the house settled into an eerie stillness. The detritus of the party remained half-empty plates crowding the counter, limp balloons sagging from weary thumbtacks, the sweet, cloying scent of frosting hanging in the air like a memory that refused to let go. I wandered through the house, picking up crumpled napkins and stray cups, but my hands moved on autopilot. I wasn't cleaning, I was thinking. Caleb had gone to bed clutching his memory box beneath one arm, and his old green dinosaur in the other, like a knight sleeping with his sword. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding his second note against my heart, reading the words again and again, each repetition sinking deeper than the last. They weren't long. They weren't fancy. But they were enough. More than enough. They were more than anyone had said to me in a long, long time. And that's when it washed over me like a flood I hadn't seen coming. I hadn't lost anything today. Not my dignity. Not my authority. Not my place. I hadn't surrendered power to Sierra, no matter how much she tried to bait me into a performance. What I'd done, what she couldn't understand, was stand firm without lifting my voice, without playing her petty, bitter game. Sierra thought my silence was weakness. She mistook my calm for fear. She assumed my restraint was submission. What she couldn't see, what she never could see, was that my silence had never been about fear. It was about strength. The kind of strength that doesn't posture or shout. The kind that stands so still it becomes unshakable. I didn't need to fight her, because I had nothing to prove. I didn't need to perform, because the people who truly mattered, Caleb, my mother, even Jason, already knew who I was. I let the storm pass over me, so that my son could see what resilience really looked like. And he did. He saw it in every quiet moment I chose to hold steady instead of lash out. That party, that box, that letter, it wasn't just a celebration of Caleb's birthday. It was a testament to the life we'd built, to the boy I had raised, to the love we shared, that no one could cheapen or replace. Brian might have walked out years ago, taking his pride and his easy comforts and someone to stroke his ego, but he didn't take the heart of our home. He didn't take my strength. He didn't take Caleb's respect. And Sierra, she waltzed in like she owned the place and walked out quieter than she had come, not because I shamed her, but because I refused to give her the stage. That's a lesson I want Caleb to carry with him long after I'm gone, that real power doesn't need to roar. Sometimes it only needs to whisper or stand silent and let the truth speak for itself. Later that night, I crept quietly into Caleb's room. The soft hush of his breath filled the space, slow and steady. His face relaxed in the peaceful sleep only children seem to manage. Beside him, the box rested on his pillow like a secret he was holding close to his heart. I lingered in the doorway for what felt like forever. This day hadn't gone as I'd planned when I strung the blue streamers, or baked the cupcakes, or pressed the creases from the superhero tablecloth. No, it had become something better. It had become proof. Proof that what we have, what we always had, was stronger than anyone's insecurity or attempt to diminish it. Proof that love, the kind that matters, doesn't scream. It doesn't strut. It doesn't need validation. And proof that no matter how hard someone tries to rewrite your story, the people who know you, who truly see you, will always know where home is. Caleb knows, and now so do I. When I finally turned off the lights and sank into my own bed, I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel angry. I felt proud. Not just of the silence I kept, but of the choice I made to never shrink someone else just to make myself feel bigger. Proud of the boy I raised, the man I know he will become, who stood in his truth tall and sure, without ever needing anyone's permission to do so. And proud deeply, so that in the end, love, our quiet, unadorned, handmade love, had the last word. Because what began as just another birthday party ended up teaching me one of the most profound lessons I've ever learned as a mother. You don't always have to raise your voice to be heard. You don't always need to fight to win. Sometimes you just need to let love speak. And if this story found its way into a corner of your heart, if you too have ever stood in a room where your silence spoke louder than someone else's cruelty, maybe you'll pass this along to someone else who needs to hear it. Maybe you'll give it a like, maybe even subscribe to this space where stories like ours, raw, real, a little messy, but always rooted in truth, have a home. Because here, we honor the quiet victories, the ones that rarely get applause, but matter more than most people will ever understand.